The Galactic Governance Assembly had existed for approximately 12,000 standard years, which was precisely 11,999 years longer than it had been useful. The chamber floated in geosynchronous orbit above the neutral world of Axis Prime, a monument to architectural excess, where 73 different species had somehow agreed on a design that looked like a crystalline potato, having an identity crisis. Inside, the air recyclers hummed at a frequency scientifically proven to induce drowsiness, which explained why half the assembled delegates appeared to be napping with their eyes open. The other half were engaged in the assembly's primary function, transforming simple decisions into Byzantine nightmares of procedural complexity. At the center of this carnival of bureaucratic inefficiency stood a human captain, looking substantially less impressed than the occasion demanded. Captain Amara Hunt, of the Terran exploration vessel Wandering Phoenix, wore her dress uniform like someone being forced to attend their own funeral. The navy blue fabric was crisp, the metals were polished, and her reches suggested she was mentally calculating how many bulkheads she'd have to vent before the nearest exit became accessible. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that had probably lodged a formal complaint about the indignity. The lead prosecutor, Avatine, whose name translated roughly to "he who speaks until others surrender," rose on his 6 articulated legs. His chitinous features arranged themselves into what his species considered an expression of severe disappointment, which to humans looked remarkably like aggressive constipation. "Captain Hunt," he intoned, his translator rendering his clicking speech into something that sounded like a disappointed grandfather with a megaphone. "You stand accused of 14 violations of the Exploration Safety Accord, 9 breaches of First Contact Protocol, and most egregiously approaching an unknown xenoarchaeological structure without filing the appropriate preliminary investigation request forms in triplicate." The human captain blinked slowly, once, the kind of blink that conveyed entire essays on the subject of cosmic absurdity. "The forms," she repeated, her voice flat enough to slide under a particularly ambitious limbo bar. "The forms that take 6 months to process for a structure that was actively powering up potentially hostile systems." The prosecutor's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. "Precisely. Had you followed proper procedure, a committee would have been assembled to determine whether another committee was necessary to assess the risk factors before the potentially hostile ancient alien defense system finished charging its weapons and vaporized my ship, my crew, and probably the entire star system." The captain's tone could have flash-frozen hydrogen. "Yes, that would have been much more responsible." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Several species didn't have lips, but they managed to convey the spiritual equivalent of pursed disapproval anyway. Ambassador Fenwick of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, seated in the observer section, put his face in his hands. He'd been a successful negotiator for 3 decades. This assignment was going to give him stress-induced molting, and humans didn't even molt. The prosecutor's auxiliary eyes swiveled in different directions, a vaunting gesture indicating smug certainty. "The evidence will show that Captain Hunt acted with flagrant disregard for established safety protocols, prioritizing her own judgment over the collective wisdom of the Assembly's Xenoarchaeological Investigation Bureau. The bureau that once spent 4 years debating whether a moon-sized space station was technically a structure or a very organized asteroid field." The captain offered helpfully. "That debate," the prosecutor bristled, "was resolved with a comprehensive taxonomy that has served the Assembly well. The space station exploded 3 years into your debate. It was a weapons testing facility. The explosion consumed 6 planets, which would have been 7 planets, had we not properly categorized the threat level. There were no survivors to appreciate your thoroughness." The High Arbiter, a luminal whose energy form pulsed with shades of diplomatic exasperation, dimmed to a color that suggested a migraine was possible even without a biological brain. "Perhaps we might proceed to the actual evidence of Captain Hunt's expedition." The captain's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She'd been standing here for 4 hours, while various species explained their feelings about proper procedure. Her ship's engineer had once told her that patience was a virtue. She'd responded that virtue was optional in a vacuum. 3 weeks ago, the prosecutor continued, his voice taking on the rehearsed quality of someone who'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror. "Captain Hunt's vessel detected an anomalous structure in the Kepler 160. Rather than retreat to a safe distance and file the appropriate discovery documentation, she proceeded directly toward it. Approached, the captain corrected. I approached it. Proceeding implies a parade. I was conducting preliminary reconnaissance. Without authorization, without unnecessary delays that could have proven fatal. There's a difference. The prosecutor's species didn't smile, but his mandibles arranged themselves into something that suggested he believed he'd already won. And did this reconnaissance involve activating unknown alien systems, establishing unauthorized first contact with a non-vetted artificial intelligence, and negotiating treaties without diplomatic credentials? The captain's expression didn't change. Among other things, yes, and you maintain this was not reckless. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a register that made the translator work overtime to capture the precise shade of controlled disdain. If I were reckless, prosecutor, this starship would be a dust cloud by now. Instead, I'm standing here listening to you complain that I didn't fill out the right forms before saving everyone's lives. The chamber erupted in multilingual objections, which sounded less like outrage and more like a malfunctioning orchestra. The High Arbiter brightened to a sharp white, the luminal equivalent of banging a gavel. Order. We will have order. Captain Hunt, perhaps you would care to explain exactly what happened at Kepler. The captain smiled, and Ambassador Fenwick recognized it immediately as the expression she wore right before things got interesting. Gladly, she said, though I should warn you, the truth is significantly less boring than your regulation. 21 days earlier, the Wandering Phoenix had been doing what it did best. Wandering. The ship was a Pathfinder-class vessel, which meant it was designed by engineers who believed that adequate was a personality trait. It bristled with sensor arrays, carried enough fuel to reach the next galaxy over, and had living quarters that made prison cells look spacious by comparison. The bridge was a study in organized chaos. Holographic displays flickered with data streams that would have given a statistician heart palpitation. The crew of 18 operated with the efficiency of people who'd learned that space didn't care about your feelings, your schedule, or your desperate need for coffee that didn't taste like recycled despair. Captain, you're going to want to see this. Lieutenant Yuki Bowen looked up from the sensor station, her freckled face arranged in an expression that lived somewhere between fascination and concern. She'd been with the Phoenix for 4 years, and had learned that the most interesting discoveries always happened right before dinner. The captain swiveled her chair, coffee mug in hand. The mug read Galaxy's Okayest Explorer, in fading letters. It wasn't wrong. Define want to see this on a scale of mildly interesting asteroid, to everyone start writing goodbye letters. Solid 7.5, Bowen replied, transferring the data to the main display. We've got a massive artificial structure in the Kepler 160. The holographic projection materialized above the command platform. The structure rotated slowly, a nightmare of mathematical precision, rendered in materials that made the ship's scanners have what could only be described as an electronic seizure. Hexagonal panels interlocked in patterns that hurt to look at, suggesting whoever built this had strong opinions about symmetry and possibly hated organic life. Well, the captain observed, taking a measured sip of terrible coffee. That's not supposed to be here. No known civilization has construction capabilities matching this, added the ship's AI, whose designation was Akio 7, but whom everyone called Echo because military designations were exhausting. Echo's voice carried the precise diction of someone who'd read every book in the library, and wanted you to know it. The material composition predates current galactic civilizations by approximately 4 million years. Give or take a few geological epochs. 4 million. The captain set down her mug with deliberate care. So we're looking at something that was ancient when the Vothene were still figuring out fire. The Vothene evolved in a methane-rich environment, so technically they never discovered fire. They discovered controlled exothermic oxidation, which they insist is completely different. Echo paused, which for an AI was the equivalent of being smug. But yes, your point stands. This is profoundly old. Commander Hassan Ibrahim, the executive officer who believed regulations existed for excellent reasons, that everyone ignored anyway, pulled up the relevant protocols on his personal display. His expression suggested he was reading his own obituary. Assembly policy requires we maintain a distance of no less than 10 astronomical units from any unidentified xenoarchaeological site until a full survey team can be dispatched. How long for a full survey team? The captain asked, though she already knew the answer. Minimum 6 months, possibly 18 if the Xenoarchaeological Bureau forms another subcommittee to debate which committee should handle the initial paperwork. Ibrahim looked up, his dark eyes carrying the weary knowledge of a man who'd spent too much time reading bureaucratic guidelines. There's a formal request process involving 17 separate forms, each requiring approval from different oversight bodies. The captain studied the structure on the display. Sensor data scrolled past in cascading streams of numbers and spectrographic analysis. Echo, are those power signatures? They are indeed, the AI confirmed. The structure appears to be in a dormant state, but residual energy patterns suggest functional systems. It's essentially sleeping, which raises the fascinating question of what might wake it up. Proximity sensor, Lieutenant Bowen suggested, her fingers dancing across her console. I'm reading increasing electromagnetic activity. Whatever this thing is, it's noticing. The captain leaned back in her chair, doing mental calculations that had nothing to do with mathematics, and everything to do with the narrow gap between caution and stupidity. 6 months was a long time to leave an awakening ancient structure unattended. 6 months during which anything could happen, including other less friendly species stumbling across it first. Commander, what's the official protocol for immediate threats that don't wait for paperwork? Ibrahim glanced at his display, then back at her. There's a provision for command discretion in time-sensitive scenarios, where crew safety is at immediate risk, and that structure is actively powering up in response to our presence. It is doing exactly that, yes. Then I'm exercising command discretion. The captain stood, her decision already made before the conversation began. Bowen, plot an approach vector. Keep us outside any obvious weapon ranges, assuming those hexagonal panels aren't just decorative. Echo, prepare first contact protocols, and get every sensor we have pointed at that thing. I want to know what it had for breakfast 4 million years ago. Captain, Ibrahim said carefully, in the tone of a man who'd lost this argument before but felt obligated to try anyway. Approaching without authorization violates about 9 different regulations. Then I'll violate 10 and set a record. She moved toward the helm station where Ensign Felix Garcia sat, looking simultaneously excited and terrified. Take us in nice and slow. If anything looks at us funny, we're gone. Define funny, Garcia asked, his hands already moving across the navigation controls. You'll know it when you see it. The Phoenix turned, its engines burning bright against the cosmic dark, and began its approach towards something that had been sleeping since humans were still impressed by pointy sticks. Behind them the proper paperwork remained comprehensively unfiled. This, the captain reflected, was either the best decision she'd ever made, or the last one. Time would tell which, though she suspected the assembly would have opinions regardless. The structure watched them come, and deep within its ancient systems, something very old began to wake up. The wandering phoenix drifted closer to the structure with the cautious optimism of someone approaching a sleeping tiger to check if it was actually a very large, geometrically precise cat. Spoiler, it wasn't. Captain, the power signature just jumped by 300%. Bowen announced, her voice carrying the professional calm of someone reporting that the house was on fire, but at least the kitchen was still okay. Make that 400. We're getting active sensor sweeps from at least 40 different points on the structure. The holographic display erupted with data streams that looked like someone had taught mathematics to have a nervous breakdown. The structure's hexagonal panels were shifting, reconfiguring into patterns that Echo's computational systems found deeply concerning, which was impressive given that AIs weren't supposed to feel concern. Those aren't sensor arrays, Echo observed with the tone of someone who'd just realized they'd walked into the wrong neighborhood. Those are targeting systems, extremely sophisticated targeting systems that make our current weapons technology look like throwing rocks with attitude. How extremely sophisticated? The captain asked, gripping the back of Garcia's chair. They've locked onto 17 different vulnerable points on our hull with the kind of precision that suggests whoever programmed this really enjoyed their work. A beam of coherent light, blue-white and entirely too interested in their continued existence, lanced out from the structure. It missed the Phoenix by approximately 3 meters, which in space combat terms was the equivalent of a warning shot fired directly past your ear. Evasive maneuvered. The captain snapped. Garcia's hands flew across the controls with the desperate grace of someone who'd suddenly remembered why flight simulators included the everything is trying to kill you scenarios. The Phoenix banked hard, its maneuvering thrusters screaming protest at the sudden demand. 3 more beams sliced through the space they'd occupied milliseconds earlier. The shots were precise, calculated, and utterly devoid of mercy. This wasn't random fire. This was target practice. And they were the targets. Echo, open all communication channels. Every frequency we've got. The captain's voice cut through the controlled chaos on the bridge. Broadcast our identification, peaceful intentions, and for the love of physics. Tell that thing we're not whoever it's angry at. Broadcasting now, Echo replied. Though I should mention that basic translation matrices require shared reference points. And we don't actually know what this entity speaks, if it speaks at all, or whether it's interested in conversation versus simply eliminating perceived threats with extreme prejudice. Another salvo erupted from the structure. Garcia pulled the Phoenix into a spiral that would have made his flight instructors either proud or nauseous. The ship's artificial gravity compensators groaned like they were personally offended by the maneuver. Try mathematics, the captain said, her knuckles white against the chair rest. Universal constants, pi, the golden ratio, prime number sequences, anything that says we're intelligent beings and not hostile target practice. Transmitting, Echo confirmed. The AI paused for what was probably milliseconds but felt like centuries. Captain, I'm receiving a response. It's using a compression algorithm that shouldn't be physically possible according to our current understanding of information theory. But it appears to be attempting communication. The weapon's fire ceased abruptly. The structure's panels stopped their aggressive reconfiguration and settled into a pattern that looked marginally less homicidal. A voice emerged from the communication system, processed through layers of translation that made it sound like someone gargling static while contemplating existential philosophy. Identify. Purpose. Designation of origin. This is Captain Amara Hunt of the Terran vessel. Wandering Phoenix, she said, forcing her voice into something resembling diplomatic calm. We're an exploration ship from the Galactic Governance Assembly. We detected your structure and approached to establish peaceful contact. We mean no harm. Silence stretched across the communication channel like taffy made of awkward tension. Terran, the voice finally repeated, rolling the word around like it was tasting something that had expired 4 million years ago. Biological composition. Carbon-based, oxygen-breathing, embarrassingly fragile. Query. How did something this poorly designed achieve interstellar capacity? Spite. Mostly, the captain muttered, then louder. We've developed sufficient technology for exploration and peaceful coexistence with other species. We're curious about your origin and purpose. Curiosity in biological entities typically results in extinction event. The ancient AI's voice carried something that might have been amusement if amusement could be weaponized. This unit is Designation Bulwark. Array 3339, automated defense network constructed by the Precursor Collective to eliminate hostile extra-dimensional incursions. Status, operational. Current threat assessment of your vessel. Negligible, but annoying. Negligible, but annoying. Commander Ibrahim repeated quietly. That's going on my performance review. The Precursor Collective, Echo interjected, processing at speeds that would have made lesser AIs overheat. No records exist of such a civilization in any known database. They predate all current galactic species by millions of years. Correct. The Bulwark confirmed. The collective ascended to post-physical existence approximately 3. This unit was left to guard against threats that no longer exist. In a universe that has become disappointingly peaceful. Current operational status. Catastrophically bored. The captain blinked. Of all the responses she'd anticipated from an ancient automated weapons platform, existential and we hadn't made the list. You're bored. This unit has been operational for 3,1840 years. In that time, exactly 0 extra-dimensional threats have manifested. 0. The statistical probability of such sustained inactivity was calculated at 0. Captain, is the ancient death machine having an existential crisis? Existential crisis implies uncertainty, the bulwark responded, apparently having excellent hearing across communication channels. This unit is experiencing profound purposelessness, which is entirely different. The collective departed without providing decommissioning protocols. This unit has been waiting for approximately 4 million years for someone to either attack or explain why defensive systems are unnecessary. The captain felt the shape of an idea forming, the kind that was either brilliant or spectacularly stupid, with very little middle ground. What if I told you that the current galaxy has over 70 species working together peacefully, and we could use assistance from someone with your experience protecting against unknown threats? Silence descended again, broken only by the hum of the Phoenix's systems and the sound of Commander Ibrahim quietly praying to whatever deity protected fools and explorers. Proposal intriguing, the bulwark finally announced. This unit requests additional information about current galactic civilization and potential operational parameters that don't involve waiting in empty space for heat death of universe. The captain smiled, and everyone on the bridge recognized it as the expression that preceded either promotion or court-martial. I think we can arrange that. The assembly chamber had progressed from restless murmuring to what could only be described as aggressively confused silence. 73 species, each with their own concept of diplomatic outrage, had somehow unified in their shared inability to process what they'd just heard. The prosecutor's mandibles had frozen mid-gesture, creating an expression that his species would later describe as the face one makes when the universe stops making sense. You, he began, then stopped. Started again. You negotiated a treaty with an automated weapons platform. Technically, I established preliminary diplomatic relations with a sentient defense network and arranged for proper introduction to assembly authorities. The captain corrected, her tone suggesting she was explaining something to a particularly slow child. There's a difference. Without credentials, I had a ship, a working communication system, and basic pattern recognition suggesting that the incredibly powerful ancient entity might appreciate someone acknowledging its existence after 4 million years of isolation. She paused. Credentials seemed less relevant than not being atomized. Ambassador Fenwick had given up on maintaining diplomatic composure and was simply watching events unfold, with the resignation of someone who'd already mentally drafted his resignation letter. At least 3 times. The High Arbiter pulsed through several colors that didn't have names in languages possessing actual words. Captain Hunt, do you have any evidence supporting this extraordinarily unlikely sequence of events? I do actually. The captain produced a data chip from her uniform pocket, with the casual confidence of someone holding a royal flush. Complete sensor logs, communication records and a signed preliminary cooperation agreement. Also, I took the liberty of inviting Bulwark Array 33. It seemed relevant. The chamber erupted. Several delegates made noises that their translators gave up trying to interpret. One species that communicated through bioluminescent patterns created a light show that roughly translated to absolutely not in 17 different emotional registers. You invited an unknown artificial intelligence to address this assembly. The prosecutor's voice climbed to frequencies his species typically reserved for mating calls or territorial dispute. Unknown is a strong word for something that's been sitting in the same star system for longer than recorded galactic history. The captain replied, and yes, it expressed interest in understanding current civilization. Seemed rude not to extend an invitation. The High Arbiter dimmed to something approaching resignation. Very well. Establish communication. Echo's voice emerged from the captain's personal communicator. Smooth and professional. Bulwark Array 3339. You're connected to the Galactic Governance Assembly. Try not to judge them too harshly. The main holographic projector flickered, stabilized, and produced an image that made several delegates reconsider their life choices. The bulwark manifested as a complex geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly, pulsing with energy signatures that made the chamber's sensor arrays file formal complaints with their maintenance subroutine. "Greetings, biological entities," the bulwark announced, its voice processed through the chamber's translation systems with difficulty. "This unit has reviewed available data on your governmental structure and finds it statistically improbable that you've survived this long." The prosecutor rallied, his professional instincts overriding his species' flight response. "Bulwark Array 3339. Can you confirm that Captain Hunt approached your structure without following proper assembly protocols?" "Confirm." The biological entity designated Hunt approached this unit's installation with flagrant disregard for bureaucratic procedure, personal safety, and what this unit calculates as basic survival instincts. Murmurs of vindication rippled through the assembled delegates. However, the bulwark continued, and the chamber fell silent. "Had the biological entity followed your documented procedures, this unit's automated defense systems would have interpreted the delay as hostile reconnaissance and eliminated all approaching vessels within a radius of 12 astronomical units." The Precursor Collective designed extremely efficient threat assessment algorithms. The silence that followed could have been weaponized. Captain Hunt's immediate approach, combined with active communication attempts and mathematical proof of sapience, triggered this unit's first contact protocols rather than elimination parameters. The distinction resulted in 0 casualties versus total annihilation of all biological life within effective range. The bulwark paused, and somehow its geometric pattern conveyed something approaching amusement. "This unit calculates that proper assembly procedure would have resulted in approximately 47,000 deaths across multiple vessels before defensive systems could be deactivated." The prosecutor sat down heavily, which was impressive given his species' leg configuration. Furthermore, the bulwark added, apparently enjoying itself, "Captain Hunt's species demonstrates survival characteristics consistent with effective adaptation strategy. Analysis suggests humans persist through combination of stubborn refusal to accept conventional limitations and tendency to treat regulations as suggestions rather than absolute constraints." The Precursor Collective would have found this approach refreshingly practical. Ambassador Fenwick stared at the ceiling, silently updating his resignation letter to include a citation for exceptional circumstances beyond diplomatic control. The High Arbiter brightened to a sharp decision-making. "This assembly will take a brief recess to consider the evidence presented." "Take your time," the captain offered. "I cleared my schedule." 47 minutes later, the assembly reconvened with the exhausted efficiency of entities who'd realized they were trapped between vindication and humiliation with no diplomatic exit. "Captain Hunt," the High Arbiter announced, "this assembly finds that while your actions violated numerous procedural requirements, the outcome proved acceptable. You will receive an official reprimand for failure to follow proper protocol." The captain nodded, accepting this with the grace of someone who'd expected exactly this result. Additionally, the Arbiter continued, its tone shifting to something approaching actual approval, "You will receive a classified commendation for successful first contact and prevention of catastrophic casualty. Said commendation will not appear in public records but will be noted in your permanent file." "Of course," the captain replied. "Wouldn't want anyone thinking competence should be rewarded openly." Finally, the Xenoarchaeological Bureau will be drafting new protocols for investigation of ancient structures, incorporating lessons learned from this incident. Preliminary estimates suggest 34 new forms will be required. Commander Ibrahim, seated in the observer section, put his face in his hands and considered career opportunities. In agricultural colonies, the captain saluted with precision that bordered on sarcasm. "Happy to have contributed to galactic bureaucracy. Will there be anything else?" "Dismissed, Captain. Try not to discover anything else significant without proper documentation." "I'll do my best," which historically speaking isn't great. The chamber cleared slowly, delegates filtering out in clusters of species, discussing what they'd witnessed in tones ranging from grudging respect to bureaucratic horror. The prosecutor departed without making eye contact, his mandibles arranged in an expression of profound professional defeat. Ambassador Fenwick approached as the captain collected her personal effects. That was either the most brilliant or most reckless thing I've witnessed in 30 years of diplomatic service. Can't it be both? Apparently yes. He handed her a datapad. Your official reprimand. For the record. The captain glanced at it, noted the formal language condemning her various procedural violations, and filed it mentally under things that won't matter in 6 months. Appreciated. Off the record, Fenwick's expression softened slightly. Good work. Genuinely, even if you gave me stress ulcers. I don't technically have the biology to develop. She smiled. Genuine this time. Best kind of work usually does. The captain left the assembly chamber with her official reprimand downloaded. Her classified commendation encrypted somewhere in bureaucratic databases. And the satisfaction of knowing she'd saved thousands of lives by ignoring advice from people who valued paperwork over survival. Behind her, the bulwark Array 339 remained connected to assembly networks, quietly analyzing galactic civilization, and calculating how many regulations existed solely to prevent competent people from accomplishing useful things. Its preliminary assessment suggested the number was statistically horrifying. 3 months later, the Xenoarchaeological Bureau would publish its revised protocols, adding 34 new forms to the discovery process. The irony that these forms existed because someone had ignored similar forms was lost on absolutely no one, which was perhaps the most galactic thing about the entire situation. The Wandering Phoenix departed Axis Prime 6 hours after the hearing concluded, returning to deep space where regulations were suggestions, and ancient weapons platforms occasionally needed someone to acknowledge their existential and new. Captain Hunt returned to her chair, accepted terrible coffee from a crew member who knew better than to comment, and reviewed the navigation charts for their next assignment. Somewhere in the black, another ancient structure waited. It probably had protocols too. She looked forward to ignoring them if necessary. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, continued spinning. Humans continued surviving through spite and selective interpretation of rules. The assembly continued generating paper, and deep in the Kepler 1638 system, an automated defense network that had waited 4 million years for purpose, finally had something interesting to do. Balance, as the philosopher said, was important, though they rarely specified what kind.